Alright, this is video 3 of my quarter scale sandrail build. In this video I'm going to be talking about the shocks and how I built them. Here's 3 of the shocks. The 2 shorter ones are from the front. The one slightly longer one is from the rear. I have the other rear shock all blown apart over here so you can see how I built them. I started with the shock bodies. That's just made out of a piece of aluminum tubing that I'd bought in that had a 3/4 inch ID. And then I threaded the outside in a lathe, and I made these collars that have a little step on them for the spring to catch on. And I put those little dimples around them so that you can put your fingers on there to adjust the spring rate. Then on the end, to make the end solid, you can see there's a slight seam kind of right there. I made that out of a solid piece of aluminum that's threaded inside the tube, but it's all Loctited in there, so I didn't want to take it apart. And then inside there's a hole through for the shock shaft, and then a counter bore in there for an O-ring that drops in. I can see like that, and then made these little brass bushings that goes in the top. Then that's all held in by this little snap ring. I had trouble finding a snap ring this small, so I actually made these. This is out of a E-clip that I ground the little center tab back out of the way, and then drilled 2 little holes in there, and it works out really well as a snap ring. You can put on a pair of snap ring pliers, just squeeze it just enough to get it up inside of this. You can see there's a little tiny groove inside there I machined, put it in there and let it go, and it works out really well. I made the shock shafts. These are 1/4 inch hardened steel that I turned down the end there and threaded to put a Heim joint on the end. And on the other end where the piston is, that's just made out of a piece of nylon. And originally I had put these on, the shaft had 2 little grooves in it with an E-clip above and below the nylon piston, but when I drove it, the vibration and the force actually of the piston moving up and down through the shock oil would cause it to pop those E-clips right off of there, and then it would all fall apart. So I ended up making these collars that are set screwed to the shaft, then a little spacer, and then I drilled and tapped the end of the shaft, and holding the piston on then with a screw, and that's worked out really well. It hasn't fallen apart since I've done that. So then that of course goes through there, and the shock body is filled with shock oil. And then the top cap I machined up out of a piece of billet. It's got an internal thread that matches the thread that's on the outside of the shock body. This O-ring drops inside there to seal it so the oil doesn't leak out. And then I machined the top, this little tab on there, and then a bushing similar to the bushings that I put on the suspension arms goes through that tab, and then that gets mounted to the chassis of the car so it can pivot on that bushing. Works out pretty well. And on the bottom, down here to hold the spring on, there's this other aluminum cap, and that's counterboard for the Heim joint to fit inside. That slips on, and then the spring can catch on that little lip, keep it from sliding off sideways. For the springs, I ended up buying a 3-foot long piece of spring from McMaster, and then just chopped off the amount that I needed for each shock, and that was the leftover from that. And when you put it all back together, he ends up looking like that. Worked out pretty good. And that's it.